Okay, I want to talk a bit about a subject that I have very strong views on, and I have had strong views on for a very long time. That subject is about custodial sentencing, penal reform, and generally justice. I won't have time to talk about absolutely everything I want to talk about, but this is a video I want to make. It's partly related to the videos I made critiquing the Scandinavian justice system, which I believe is far too lenient and quite frankly, in my opinion, morally abhorrent, in the sense that it treats criminals as if they've done nothing wrong. The punishments are, well, I won't get into that, but I want to talk about, it therefore falls on me to suggest what I believe will be a better alternative. Not necessarily alternative, but what I'm saying is, if I'm going to criticise something, I should be responsible and suggest what I think is better. First thing I want to say is I don't think there is any penal system in the world that can be considered perfect. I don't believe that exists, and I don't think it ever will exist. With the best will in the world, I don't think that can ever exist, because there's always going to be some flaw. Whatever way you look at it, no matter what the best intentions are, there's always going to be some flaw in that sort of system. So you have different extremes. You have, on one hand, what I would call the neoliberal extreme, which is just an extremely liberal, extremely lenient approach, which is what you see in Scandinavian countries. But then you have a regime that is too harsh, that is too militarized in a sense, and I would quote the United States for that. There is some things that go on in American prisons that don't only not reduce crime, but they are morally questionable. I mean, solitary confinement for weeks, months, even years on end is a brutal violation of basic human rights. And I do think that is important in this debate, and that's coming from someone who regards himself as very conservative on this issue. I don't think it makes you soft on crime to acknowledge that is important. Then of course you have the systems in totalitarian countries, which are often very brutal and often used to persecute dissidents, and that's just awful. So what is an ideal system? The truth is, there is no ideal system. In Britain, most people believe that our system is too soft. I've mixed views on that. I think certainly some sentences that are passed down are a complete joke, and they don't reflect the crime that has taken place. But I don't think we're the worst system in the world. I also think the tabloid press has the responsibility to be more honest about exactly what happens in the system. Certainly our prisons are not the holiday camps that some people think they are, and there is certainly a lot of problems within prison. There needs to be reforms. At this point I want to talk about a group called the Hard League for Penal Reform. Now, I would have more respect for that organisation if they were honest. Their name is the Hard League for Penal Reform. It's named after Victorian reformer John Hard. The problem is they are what I would consider extreme liberals. They have no concept whatsoever that punishment is part of justice. And they say they're about penal reform. My opinion is their real agenda is penal abolition. I believe that is their ultimate goal. Now, to me, penal abolition is reckless and immoral. It's reckless because you're going to have dangerous people basically free to do what they want. And it's immoral because people who terrorise society should be punished. Now, I really find myself having very little patience with people who cannot grasp the basic principle of punishment and the basic principle of responsibility. If someone makes a choice to commit a crime, that person, if they're of an age where they understand the difference between right and wrong, and by the way, I believe a 15-year-old does. There's been a controversy in Britain recently because a judge decided to name the 15-year-old who killed a school teacher. He killed her in a knife attack, and the liberal lobbyists were complaining that he shouldn't be named. Those on the right say he should be named. I'm of the view 15 is old enough to know the difference between right and wrong. He is a callous thug. He expressed no remorse for what he'd done. He should be named to keep the public safe, because when he is released, if he is still dangerous, then the public need to be aware of who he is. So as far as I'm concerned, he's got no right whatsoever to anonymity. He stole that woman's life. He has stolen a mother from her children, a wife from her husband. He's a thug, and he's shown no remorse. He shouldn't get any privileges. But without going off on a tangent, what is an ideal prison system? That is not an easy one to answer. Ideally, what I would like to see is a system that is tough but humane. I'll say that again, tough but humane. Now, there's two extremes out there. There are systems that are only humane and they don't focus at all on punishment. Like they only focus on rehabilitation. And there's nothing wrong with rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a very important part of the justice system. Of course it is. There wouldn't be any point of having a system whereby criminals just reoffend. And I completely acknowledge that is a problem. There are people who say that prisons are just universities for criminals. I do understand the argument behind that. But what those people need to understand is that people who have committed serious crimes, a community sentence does not reflect the seriousness of that crime. So prison itself is not a problem, and this is something that I get really worked up with when people start to act like prison itself is the problem. It is not prison, and it is not prison numbers, it is how prison is run. I believe in this country we do need penal reform. There is far too many inmates taking their own lives, and as much as I'm conservative on this issue, I do not want a system whereby people are so miserable that they're killing themselves, regardless of what crime they've committed. I don't believe in an inhumane system. So if you have situations like sexual abuse going on inside prison, if you have serious bullying going on, those issues need to be taken very, very seriously, and vulnerable inmates should be given help. I'm not saying they aren't given help, but clearly there has been far too many inmates taking their own lives. Now, regardless of what crime they've committed, I don't want that situation. It doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make me feel good. So I do not want that situation. We're a civilized country, and we need to have a humane system. That means making sure that inmates who are vulnerable are protected. And that's another point. Sometimes when you hear of a really heinous crime, you see tabloid opinions sort of say, oh, they'll get justice inside from the other inmates and this sort of thing. Again, I don't endorse that idea at all, because then you have a situation where you're allowing anarchy in prison. Now, when I say I want a tough penal system, I want a system whereby inmates don't piss around, and where they don't do what they want, and whereby they don't take revenge on other inmates, because then it's just anarchy, and they're going to be even worse when they come out. So inmates who have been guilty of sensitive crimes, for example crimes against children, in no way should I think they should be given lenient treatment. But I don't believe in vigilantism inside. I don't think it's in fact I believe the tabloid press should be banned altogether, because another problem with that is in cases of miscarriages of justice, which does sometimes happen, then you get an innocent person being targeted by thugs, and it does nothing for us as a country to have that sort of situation. People guilty of very heinous crimes, especially against children, should be given severe punishments. Years behind bars, no special perks. But I don't believe in prison vigilantism, because I believe that represents anarchy inside. Regarding what prisoners should have access to, I do believe they should have some form of education, especially relating to the crime that they have committed. For example, if it has been a sex crime, they should be educated on why that's wrong, why they are paying a price for what they have done. For example, respect for women or something like that. So there should be some form of education. Access to books, there was a big debate about this. I would say yes, but limit the number of books. Because what reformers need to understand is that if you just give prisoners anything they ask for, then there is no punishment whatsoever. And punishment has to be part of the justice system. Now, there's petty sort of punishments that can lead to a potential riot situation. For example, depriving cigarettes from chain-smoking prisoners is not a good idea. It's only going to cause a riot. However, there should be other perks that are banned. I don't believe they should have access to televisions. I don't believe they should have anything other than those things that are necessary to keep them sane. Newspapers, I'm not sure about. I don't believe they should have the right to vote. That is something that law-abiding citizens have the right to do. Now, reformers say you want to make them into responsible citizens, but you start by telling them that there is consequences for what they have done. And if you just give them anything they want, then they aren't seeing any consequences. It may as well just be like a holiday park, basically, like the Norwegian system, where there is absolutely no punishment factor whatsoever. They will say, oh well, they're not allowed to leave. If you're a prisoner in those conditions, you wouldn't want to leave. But basically, I do not believe that prisons should be hellholes. I don't believe that. I believe they should be humane insofar as if there is a prisoner who has serious mental health problems, or they're a victim of bullying or sexual abuse, that needs to be taken very seriously. I don't get any joy from hearing about prisoners kill themselves. Although, something that needs to be pointed out, a lot of the time, antisocial behaviour can lead to suicides for the victims. So to me, an ideal prison would be a prison that has necessary humane conditions, for example, exercise, food, and some extra things, for example, access to education, access to books. I have no big problem with that. But I don't see why they should have a television. Why? Why should they have something that law-abiding citizens have? In fact, law-abiding citizens have to pay a TV license. Inmates don't. So that, I see no reason why they should have that. It's not a necessary thing. They can survive without it. Many people do. So no, they don't need that. If you have inmates with drug dependency issues, and I know this is another issue that some people believe people shouldn't be incarcerated for drug offences. I'm of the view that they shouldn't be incarcerated for drugs alone. However, if they've committed a crime, a serious crime, in pursuit of drugs, then absolutely they should be punished. But I don't believe that using drugs in itself should be a crime. There's a lot of focus put on the number of prisoners. We have a pretty high population at the moment, the highest in Europe. I believe it's currently 86,000. That is a lot of people. But a few things I would point out with that. It is not the number of prisoners that is the problem, it is how prison is run. So if you have an improved prison system, then people should be jailed for serious crimes. Now, I don't believe that someone should go to jail for stealing from Tesco's because they're in a dire situation. I believe there are people in jail for reasons they should not be in jail. Another one would be not paying their TV license. They should not be in jail for that. So I believe that community sentencing has its place, although a lot of the economic crimes, as I would say, have been brought about by the government's austerity cuts. But there's areas, for example, regarding community sentencing, I think it's a good idea. However, what reformers and liberals also need to recognise is that there are people who are repeat offenders who commit the same offence over and over and over again. Now, community sentences in those cases is clearly not working, and those people clearly need something harsher thrown in their direction. Because if you have a shoplifter and they're a first time offender and they express serious remorse, then okay, a community sentence, I would say, is applicable. Maybe second time. But if they commit it a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time, and by the way, this is sometimes the case, you do get people doing community sentences who literally laugh at the system. They couldn't care less. And the long-suffering shopkeeper has to constantly replace their products. That's not fair. They don't care about community sentencing. So community sentencing is only applicable, in my opinion, to first-time offenders, maybe second-time offenders, who take it seriously. If they abide by it, if they take it seriously, then okay, they've learned their lesson. But if they don't bother showing up on time, and if they continue to commit the same crime over and over again, then it is appropriate that a more serious sentence is passed. And I strongly disagree that just because a crime doesn't involve violence, then it's somehow trivial. Take, for example, antisocial behaviour. It doesn't always necessarily involve violence, but it can drive people crazy. It can destroy lives. It can seriously disrupt someone's life. So I do believe that is an offence that we need to take much more seriously. And those who whinge about the rights of those who commit antisocial behaviour, that is the type of crime I have no sympathy with. You terrorise someone else, you face the consequences. So in conclusion, I want a penal system that is tough, whereby there are not the sort of perks that law-abiding citizens enjoy, whereby inmates know that they are there for a reason, but at the same time, I don't want a system that is barbaric and inhumane and leads inmates to kill themselves. You'll never ever have a perfect system, but you need a system that can be as best as it can be. We do need serious reforms. We do not need, as the Hard League for Penal Reform wants, total penal abolition. That is a big mistake.